Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back with episode 81 of the Leo Training Podcast. And this week, my guest is Performance Director for MovNat, Danny Clark. Danny has an incredible background as both an athlete and as a coach. Danny competed at the world stage for Team USA at the UWW World Grappling Championships in Krakow, Poland in 2012. Danny's education in evolutionary biology and archaeology gives him a very unique perspective on viewing and coaching movement. In this interview, Danny and I sit down and we discuss a few key topics around movement, such as what are the most effective ways to address movement deficiencies, why skill acquisition and development is the most important thing to train, and why skill drives fitness. So without further ado, let's roll to episode 81 with Danny Clark. I'm very excited to welcome Danny Clark onto the Leo Training Podcast. Danny, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come onto the show and share your experience and expertise with the strength and conditioning and movement communities.
Thanks for having me, brother. I'm really honored to be here and to talk with you today. Yeah,
we're going to have a really good time. We've got some awesome topics down, as I always make sure that we do. Before we get into that, as I normally do, I want you to take a couple minutes, let everybody know who you are, where you're located geographically, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So again, my name is Danny Clark. I live currently in New Mexico. I've sort of, lived in all four quadrants of the country, outside of maybe the mid, the middle section for the most part. But I am the performance director for a company called MovNat. And if you haven't heard of MovNat stands for Moving Naturally. And it's this, it's a natural movement education company. And I'm sure we'll get into, the nuts and bolts of what that is. But my background is I was a wrestler primarily. I mean, I guess that's where I started my formal training in a way, even pretty much before school. So I was an athlete, wrestled all the way through college, transitioned to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, as many of us now have. But I got on that train pretty early on, and dabbled with some mixed martial arts. And then at the same time after college, I was also embarking on taking that leap into training other people, both from an athletic standpoint and from a regular general fitness and movement standpoint as well. And I didn't have at that time formal education in exercise science. I was a double major in biology and archaeology, but my own training and my love for fitness is sort of what got me into the industry. So yeah.
Awesome. So I got to ask, you've lived in all four kind of quadrants of the U.S. So what's your favorite part geographically so far?
Well, I would say definitely the West, my heart is in the Rockies. I'll tell you that much. All the way from Montana, North Idaho, all the way down to where I am now in New Mexico. If I'm in New Mexico, I'm drooling over the Northwest and all the incredible green and water. And then when I'm in the Northwest, I'm drooling over the sunshine and those huge open landscapes. But anywhere else, I'm not really fantasizing about. And so, yeah, pretty much the Rockies are where it's at, in my opinion.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm sure it's just fantastic weather in those two spots between the Pacific Northwest and then down in New Mexico right now too. So
it's kind of extreme. I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm used to a sort of moderate climate. And very, pretty green, being near New England. So that's what makes the transition to the Southwest a little bit difficult. It's a little bit browner, a little bit drier, and more extreme in the sense of it's actually much warmer. and that's a tough transition, but it's, I'll take the sun. It's amazing.
What part of New Jersey? Because that's where I'm originally from.
South Jersey, down by Long Beach Island. I went to school at Southern Regional.
Oh, no way. Yeah. So I was from South Jersey. I went to mainland. So right near like Atlantic City.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you're actually further south than me.
Small world, man. Small world.
Oh, yep. Awesome. Absolutely.
So, let's expand a little bit on your educational background, because I think this is really pretty cool. So you double majored in evolutionary biology and archaeology. So
yeah,
why don't you kind of go in to detail a little bit about what you were studying, and then how that curriculum has kind of shaped your life moving forward, and the lens that you look through training and movement.
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. It was definitely, my education was definitely more pivotal than I thought it would be. I went into college, honestly, very skeptical over formal education, because I was like, it's just putting, my thoughts in a box. And I had a lot of trouble with it in the beginning. And a part of that was just being stubborn and, being cocky, young kid who thought he knew everything already. But as I got into it, what I was afraid of doing was getting into a particular subject and ruining it, because it would get dry and become work and become boring. And I was always a nature kid. I just loved being outside. As a wrestler, that's, it's a very, very rigorous sport. And summers I had basically off, and like summers were my chance to rejuvenate in a way. So spent a lot of time outside. I was very into anything nature, whether it be animals or whatever. So anyway, when I went to college, I did everything I could to avoid biology, because I was afraid it was going to ruin it and turn it into this dry science and, I don't know, somehow destroy its purity in my mind or whatever. But inevitably, I tried a bunch of different classes, went to a lot of different, went through basically every single subject. I was at University of Virginia, a great liberal arts school, so I had the opportunity to study a lot of different subjects. And of course, biology just really resonated with me. And then as I got into biology, I like to say I got into it for the right reasons, because I wasn't like, I'm going to be a med school student and, be a doctor and this and that. And that tends to weed a lot of people out of biology. So I showed up and, just was really genuinely interested in the subject, especially, biology 101 is very challenging, and it's, you're getting into subjects that a med student might not even really enjoy. It's getting down to, the nitty gritty science of cells and all that, of course, all the basics, but tends to weed a lot of people out, because they either it's too difficult for them, or just they lose interest because they're thinking about, whatever higher level subjects or whatever. So anyway, I was really interested in it, and I found myself really drawn to a lot of the neuroscience aspects of biology, but also a lot of the evolutionary biology. And so I started taking classes more in the, again, the neuroscience side of things, but also the environmental science department I started getting into, and then even human evolution classes. And then human evolution turned out to be super interesting, and it was sort of an interdisciplinary area where we're combining biology and environmental science and archaeology. So I just kept taking classes in that anthropology sort of spectrum as well. And as I pursued my biology degree, I met with one of my deans, and they were like, "Hey, you're like one field study away from an interdisciplinary major in archaeology." And I wasn't even trying to pursue that at all. So I was like, well, shoot, okay, I'll go, dig some Mayan ruins or whatever. And that's pretty much what I did. So, it was just sort of a natural, because I was sort of on the interdisciplinary fringe, as it was, of, again, between biology, environmental science, and archaeology. And I was just purely following my interests, and that was pretty cool. Now, at the end of the, the double major, I was sort of like, shoot, now how do I make money? And, research appealed to me, but at the same time, I've always wanted to have a family. So I wasn't really planning on, globetrotting forever. And I was already in a serious relationship. So instead of pursuing that, I made that sort of jump into the fitness industry because, I needed to make some money, and I just love the physical side of my training. I always felt it fueled my cognitive abilities and just my spirit in a lot of ways. So as an athlete who was a biology major who needed a job, fitness really just made sense. And that's kind of, how my education tied into first leading to fitness. And then, as you could probably already deduce, MovNat is obviously much more on the evolutionary side of fitness. Yeah. You can even use the word paleo, whatever you want to say. And I wouldn't say that I went that trajectory out of pure interest for paleo, though, or evolutionary fitness, because I was actually really resistant to the whole paleo thing when it came out. As my education expanded in exercise science and nutrition, I didn't like all these rules paleo had. As somebody who had an education in evolutionary biology, I was like, well, that's not true. Or, I'd hear these rules like, hunter-gatherers didn't do this or they did this. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true because this population did. And so anyway, I was always sort of skeptical of that whole arena, especially when it came to food, being more of a science mind and not really liking the parables that were going on there. So, it took me a really long time to find MovNat. It was more of like a natural extension of wanting to find the most effective way to address the movement deficiencies that I was seeing with my clients. I would come in with this really deep want to have them feel what performance felt like, because, being an athlete, especially when you're young and you're super resilient and durable, is an amazing feeling. When you feel on top of the world, you're strong, your physical capacity is very, very high. And then you meet your clients who, if you're hiring a personal trainer or somebody to program for you, typically you're a little bit older usually. And, just working on strength and conditioning just wasn't really working well because I used to do it as a supplement for my athletic training, not as like a replacement for it. It was just something that would help enhance athletic performance. So making it the way that they move as a primary way of moving, not as a way to supplement something else, didn't really make sense to me after a while. And it didn't make sense for myself anymore either. And B, just as I'm sure you've seen as a fitness professional yourself, there's such high levels of movement. I would call it incompetence or dysfunction out there. And I had no aspirations to become a physical therapist. So I just wanted to have a way to be able to work maybe in conjunction with a physical therapist, but also ingrain some of the lessons of physical therapy into movement in a very intuitive way, in a way that really resonated with people and that addressed some of the major dysfunctions that they had. So, the driving force of my transition into MovNat wasn't, again, just like this love of evolutionary biology. It was sort of my clients took me there in a way, and then my own personal dissatisfaction with the current model also kind of took me there at the same pace.
Interesting. Yeah. So one of the remarks you had made right before we got going was kind of moving from like a strength focus to a movement focus in terms of your training and your practice and stuff.
Right.
And just your response there, you can tell like that's something that is kind of much more at the forefront of what you're doing right now.
Yes.
So why do you think that's inherently so important, especially for some of the different groups that you've mentioned, older populations or even developing youth?
Well, because I think that if you're going to talk about what the most important asset you have is in terms of fitness, I think it's skill. It's the ability to move with competence. And that base of competence, that foundation comes from your ability to move naturally, do the basic movements that human beings were designed to be able to do, that were selected to be able to do by our environment in a way. So having this foundational motor skill, movement competence, whatever you want to call it, is what's going to help drive our capacity, our fitness, in a way that's safe, in a way that's really kind of have this mentality that, strength is sort of the master skill that unlocks everything else. And in a way that makes sense if you're looking through the lens of seeing fitness as just something people do to increase their physical capacity, their ability to do things with strength, conditioning, power, whatever. Now, from my lens, I look at competence or movement skill as the driving force, so that we let our skill training drive our fitness. So as we become more skilled at something, we also can become more strong, more powerful, more fast, more conditioned at the same time. So yeah, it's just a different way of looking at things. And what I see is from the time that an athlete or anybody in general enters school, they're really not moving anymore. They're stuck in these elevated chairs, or they're specialized at best. They're specializing in a sport. So if you're specializing in a sport and doing nothing else, you're going to have massive movement deficits over time. In MovNat, we look at the full spectrum of human movements, especially natural movements, and we have these 8 domains that we look at. And sports at best, like a sport like wrestling, is going to address maybe 4 or 5 of them. At worst, a sport like, say, rowing or running is just obviously only doing one thing. So you can assume that if your body isn't stimulated in a way that allows it to move well, because your body needs environmental stimulation to do that, that over time it's not going to function very, very well. I think that addressing that root issue of being able to move the way our bodies naturally are designed to move, and that in a natural setting our bodies would always be stimulated to do, is going to help solve the actual issue of movement dysfunction and lend itself better to more focused capacity-based training.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me, and it reminds me of one of my favorite quotations from Ido Portal, where he says, "We're movers first, humans second, and specialists third." And so it's like if you kind of ignore that fundamental hierarchy there, eventually it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah, we're humans and movers. It's sort of the same thing. Humans, our fundamental purpose of our brain is to move. We have all these incredible things we can do with our brains, but the fundamental reason is complex movement in complex environments. So if we remove either of those, that being a complex environment or just complex movements, we're going to have problems over time, because you need the interplay between the two to be able to move well. I think a lot of people forget that, again, our environment shapes our movement. So if you just stay in a gym all the time, if you just do one sport on a flat level field, if you just sit in an elevated chair, doesn't matter how much high level, hard to do movements you do, you're never going to move as well as you can when you have uneven surfaces, when you have contextual demands that force you to move really, really well. When you're, doing patterns that involve tasks in complex environments. I think that's super important, because again, without stimulation, without that need to be able to deal with our environments, movement can be beautiful, but it's not necessarily going to be super efficient. And that's really what we're about. Is we're not just about doing natural movement and MovNat. I think that's a common misconception. We don't just crawl for the sake of crawling and jump and climb and lift and carry and so on and so forth. We kind of go through this grooming process. So first we ask, is a particular movement effective? Meaning, out of all the 8 domains we have, which go from like ground movement all the way to high level skills like vaulting, can you do all these things first? And starting with the ground, of course, we don't want to start with something complex like vaulting. And then the next question we ask is it efficient? Meaning, can you perform these movements with a high level of performance, with the lowest energy expenditure possible and the safest way possible? And then, okay, once we groom that process of transforming these from effective to efficient, we work towards adaptable, meaning maybe you can do these particular movements in like what we call Goldilocks conditions, where everything is flat and level and narrow, or safe and simple, or controlled, to more complex environments. Can you handle, against slippery surfaces, uneven surfaces, not knowing what's coming next, all that kind of stuff. So through that actual grooming process is how we really ultimately, I think ideally, shape movement behavior, which is going to help people move better. Instead, I think of it this way. Would you rather, do PT focused corrective drills for your shoulder and foam roll for the rest of your life? Or would you rather just move your shoulders the way they were designed to move? And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, the second one sounds a lot more fun.
Yeah. But again, you look at how in the current fitness paradigm, as evolved as it is, how we approach that, we're either we're assuming that just by overhead lockout, we have healthy shoulders, which isn't necessarily true. Mm-hmm. If we can, do stuff in the sagittal plane, we can reach overhead. If we can, sometimes reach behind us, we see things very linear. Or on the far other end of the spectrum, we're doing things that are taking the joint way past its range of motion, its natural range of motion, to where it's either hypermobility or it's just outright abuse on the joint. And that's where MovNat is, and natural movement is. It's that middle ground of this is the way your body was designed to move, and this is how we're going to honor it that way. And we're going to use diverse movement patterns that are all natural, from climbing to get up transitions to lifting and carrying and so on and so forth. But we're not going to abuse the joint, and we're also not going to limit it to one plane of motion or whatever.
Awesome. Yeah. So MovNat definitely has some roots in Georges Hebert's La Méthode Naturelle, right?
Yes, it does. There's this whole history that a lot of people, of physical education, that a lot of people don't even really know about. We tend to draw from what was sort of the seed that was planted in America, which started with, like Arnold or Jane Fonda, or we're drawing from the Russian lineage, the Soviet sports science lineage. But there's this whole other, history that's sort of tied to gymnastics, but even at that time, gymnastics was coming about in a way where there was a lot more natural movement in it. And, Georges Herbert, what he did was he just sort of resurrected an idea that's been around forever. The Greeks and Romans, these people that had to be able to perform either in military or in natural settings to hunt, and they had to be able to move naturally. Physical education was just a part of life. Whereas now it's like a supplement to life. So yeah, there's this whole history that we don't really think about or know about. And, that's what we're doing in MovNat, is sort of modernizing it in a way, adding more science to it, making it a lot more, there's so much more information available now. Modernizing it and using more what I call developmental progression as opposed to just sort of doing it has been really key. But there's a really rich history there. And, again, just like the people before Herbert, who was a French naval officer, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, natural movement was born out of necessity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I can see it's kind of cool how it all ties back into our just evolution as a species.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we've gotten really far away from our roots. And that's kind of the main theme here is, we're very hung up in specializing and performance. And we forget that our roots are our performance in a lot of ways. Being able to do basic tasks. If you can't do basic tasks, you can assume that further down the chain, complex movements, even like sports, they're going to suffer. We worked with many high profile athletes now. And even though these guys are phenomenally good at their sport, there's some major, major deficits in their ability to do basic, simple movements. So that tells me there's a massive amount of room for improvement in my eyes. Because especially a sport like, say, mixed martial arts, where there's a lot of adaptability that's needed, they're put in really, really, precarious situations. If you can't do basic tasks, you can assume you're going to have deficits in your ability to cope with those circumstances. So instead of becoming a specialist, I think becoming a generalist, being able to move really well in all different circumstances, and especially those that are natural, because sports are really just an extension of natural movement, is just going to lend itself well to performance. And then just for, the layperson, it's to me, it's incredibly obvious that they need to do things beyond just lifting things, carrying things, and, jumping on a box, or, PT correctives that really have no meaning to them. So, I think if the more we can get back to our roots and address all these movement skills like ground movements, and again, I don't mean abstract ground movement. I mean very, very, obvious stuff. Like, can you sit on the ground and be comfortable, like for 10 minutes and hold an upright position? Be able to see your environment. Like, if you can't do that, how can you expect to do anything else very well? How can you expect to run well? I think I can go on tangents here, but I think that's why running gets a horrible rap, because just because you lift doesn't mean you can move very well. And that's what happened to me. Running became painful because I started just lifting. And so we start crossing off all these other movements that take us outside of our comfort zone in a lot of ways. And then we're passing this along to our clients or our students. And really, we're not empowering them the way that we could be. Again, if we can start from the ground up, if we can have them work on ground movements before they get into gait patterns, and if they can work on balancing and gait patterns like walking before they get into lifting, then all of a sudden we don't have to teach them so much. Like, we don't have to over-engineer a hip hinge because they're already going to do it pretty well if they can move well. Likewise, if they can, we already know if they can hip hinge well, they can jump well, or they're more likely to jump well. They're able to jump well and absorb the impact forces of landing. They're going to be able to vault. They're going to be able to climb. They're going to be able to do a lot of other things very, very well with less coaching than that's needed. I think we tend to see the hip hinge as like the apex of movement, and I think there's just so much more. There's so much that's missing, and I think that's if I have one thing to say to people in the strength and conditioning industry, to expand out beyond the deadlift and Turkish get-up is going to do your clients and yourself such a major service in the short term and especially in the long run.
Yeah. Just the way you describe it, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. So, considering I do a lot of those myself and I have clients that do them, give me some, if you would, some examples, of, things maybe, progression wise, around those two movements or those two skills that might be good alternatives.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say alternative. That's to me, it's Joe. I think a Turkish get up and a hip hinge are absolutely great movements. So it's not about, shunning those movements. It's just about diversifying past that and not having such a load focus or a capacity focus as well. So just to be more specific, I think just being able to, again, sit on the ground and be able to get up even without a load and, simply I like to ask people, can you get up without using your hands first? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, if you can't do that, or you only have one way to do it, that'd probably be a good starting point. Even before that, can you breathe? In fitness, we like to teach, biomechanical breathing and pressurized power breathing. And that makes sense for lifting, right? Heavy loads, but it doesn't really make sense for efficiency at all. So if I'm going to lift a really, really heavy load, I'm going to use biomechanical or pressurized breathing. Absolutely. If I'm going to move, I am not going to breathe that way. It doesn't make sense. It's not going to carry over to anything. And it's just, again, hugely inefficient. So we start with breath, and we want to make sure that our breathing is relaxed. We're using the full tidal capacity of our lungs. We're using, of course, our diaphragm, though in MovNat we don't talk a lot about muscles because, movement should be intuitive. It's based on technique, just like any other sport. But anyway, so breathing, it's tied to our autonomic nervous system and our state of relaxation. So what we want to be able to do is basic ground movements. And I don't like to say movements that you did when you were a baby, but it is movements that you did when you were a baby. And we're not doing them because you should just try to be like a baby or you're trying to somehow gain the functional benefit of that. I say do these movements because they have, if you take away these elevated chairs in our modern culture, like they have a natural practical significance in our lives. To be able to sit on the ground is important. To be able to play with your kids, to be able to move on the ground is really fundamental. To be able to move in outdoor environments, to be able to crawl under something, to be able to lower your center of gravity and, crawl on a log. So if you're willing to engage with your environment, these things are super important. So anyway, we start with breathing and ground movement before we even get into much else. And I'm not saying, of course we want clients to show up and feel like they're getting a workout. So it's not like we're just going to sit there and breathe the whole time. But it doesn't take much to get a new client sort of out of breath and feeling like they're, even crawling in a way is, which we consider just ground locomotion. And we have 10 different crawling varieties. That for somebody who is deconditioned, this is strength in a lot of ways as well. So, so crawling, and then we get into simple balancing progressions and walking progressions. So right away we could see if somebody, when they walk or when they balance, are they, trying to use their back instead of their hips because their hips don't move anymore. So if somebody is trying to step over something, if they're trying to balance and you see their back arching and out of control, you can address those right in gait patterns. And then we get into lifting and carrying.
I got a question for you. So when you observe people in terms of balance, do you, is that a skill or a movement competency that you see that has kind of deteriorated because of just all the wearing shoes and not getting the sensory information and developing that proprioception and the musculature in the foot and that lower leg strength?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so much more. It's because it's shoes, but it's also because we don't really balance anymore. And walking really, of course, is a balancing act. But if you take, we live in we live in environments that don't demand much efficiency or competency. So yeah, I mean, everybody can effectively walk, for the most part. But because our environment doesn't demand us to balance at all, yeah, it deteriorates just like any other skill that we don't do at all. So you'll see when people try to balance on something like a 2x4, they either have to step off a bunch of times, or the first thing they'll do is just lift their arms immediately and have their arms up to try to counterbalance, which is not very efficient. Again, that'll work if you're just walking on a low complexity environment. But if you're on a narrow surface, if you're on slippery conditions, your legs are actually much better counterbalancers. So, this is a skill that nobody's doing anymore. Nobody knows how to teach. And we assume that just throwing someone on a Bosu ball is going to correct that, but it's not. So, I see a lot of major deficits in balance from even very young people.
Wow. Very, very interesting. That's pretty cool. Yeah. And I know that's an area that, I haven't worked a ton on in the last couple of years, but, it's clearly super important because, we spend so much of our time when we're getting around, it's all single leg stance. And then a lot of my background has been in rowing. So sitting down. So you're just, again, I'm not getting that input, that stimulus of really working on balance. So to hear you talk about that, it's, makes you realize the importance of it for sure.
And balance is incredible because when you're balancing, it's like forced meditation in a way, because you have to be very focused. You can't, I can do kettlebell swings and be thinking about my lunch. Because I learned the movements and I'm on a flat level floor. I'm throwing around a kettlebell and I've done it 1,000 times. So I could just do it. I've been balancing now for years and it was a huge deficit for me as well. But first of all, I never know what I'm balancing on. So like a branch or something like that has uneven surfaces, so I have to pay attention. And second, if you've never balanced on something like a rail, like a narrow round surface, it takes a lot of skill, you have to be checking yourself, and you have to be very mentally engaged. And this is sort of the theme for all of MovNat's movements. We think we improve movements competence through the mindful application of technique. Okay, so meaning we have to be fully present in how we're moving. We have to put our attention on our intention and be working on all the elements of technique, which are position and breathing, sequence and timing, and the balance of tension and relaxation to improve that particular skill. So it's very mindful, it's very engaging, it's very meditative in a way. And that's, if you asked me 5 years ago, would I be interested in balancing? I'd be like, come on, man, lift some weight. I'd rather deadlift. I'd rather just, throw some heavy stuff around. So, but when you actually do it, when you actually take the time to learn it, It's extremely engaging. It's extremely empowering to be able to do these skills because, again, they lend themselves to actual real world capability. And again, this extends itself to more than balance. There's so much more to it. You get into vaulting, you get into jumping, but not just jumping on a box, but precision landing and make movement smooth and graceful and efficient and super effective. You're able to do more things than you were previously able to do. It's a whole different type of addiction than just lifting heavy stuff or getting a running high or whatever.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So I'm curious. So having kind of made that transition from such a strength focus into more of a movement focus and exploring that and focusing on balance, for example, which you described as a deficit for yourself. What are some of the changes and the benefits that you've seen personally?
Personally, well, I had 5 bulging discs in my lower back that through wrestling left me with some injuries that lifting and refining my deadlift and doing some Turkish get-ups helped initially, and then over time it didn't help at all. It got worse. And this is with a very good physical therapist looking over me, and I had some neck issues as well. So for me, geez, first of all, I'm in absolutely no pain. Second, I have much more range of motion, but again, I don't really care. I have no interest in doing splits or anything like that because it doesn't really serve a practical purpose in my life. So I'm very flexible because I have to be able to just sit. I mean, it's kind of implied in natural movement, but I'm also still very, very strong. I'm much more adaptable. I have much more confidence because my skill set is so broad. Again, I don't specialize. So I used to not be able to run at all without pain or just, again, I'm 200 pounds. I hated it because I was always in the back of the pack. Now I can run, pretty far distances, absolutely no pain. And I can go deadlift and I can pistol and I can vault and I can, do muscle ups. And I could do ground movement and just sit on the ground and play with my kids and just have a lot of energy. And, what may seem kind of young for somebody, I'm 30, turning 33. When you're 28 or so and you feel stiff and you have pain and you're afraid to run, which means you're sort of afraid to hike too, because, that means my endurance sucks if I don't ever run or do anything outside of lifting. I don't know. It just really closes in your world and affects your experience of life. And now I feel like my experience of life is always growing. I engage with my environment. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm totally, utterly uninjured and pain-free. And it's just a really, really amazing feeling. And I don't have to do any physical therapy. I don't go to a chiropractor. I don't do any of that stuff. I mean, I'd love to get a massage every once in a while, but that's about it. I don't need it. So it's just an amazing thing to just be super centered in my body. And my capability is ever expanding. I view movement as my martial art now. Strength and conditioning used to be my supplement to athletic performance. And then once I stopped, competing, it became just like something I did to move. And it just closed in my world in a lot of ways because I was like, man, what am I even doing this for? It's a supplement. It's not designed to be movement. So now, again, the world has become, my training grounds. I'm always expanding. I'm always growing. I'm always challenging myself, not always with bigger jumps or riskier things, but just the subtleties, being able to balance really well on unstable surfaces, being able to crawl through and around things, being able to lift rocks and, kind of get dirty and gritty. So yeah, I just say that overall, if there's one takeaway, it's that I feel like I'm experiencing life a lot more deeply and a lot more confidently.
That's awesome, man. It's just, it sounds like.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally, absolutely. It's just the way you describe it is just so passionate and sounds like such a much more vibrant and rich experience.
Yeah, and it's what I would never take away from how awesome lifting heavy stuff is, because it's amazing. And it's even like stretching, like getting really deep into something like yoga and really feeling your body and breathing, or gymnastics or whatever. That's amazing. But I just think there's so much more out there. And I think that the ultimate goal is for us and our clients to be able to engage with our environments and move through practical, real world, even timeless environments. And, experience the benefits of nature in the long run. That'd be amazing because there's so many incredible benefits to being outside, but also just to be able to experience the benefits of moving your body in the way it was designed to move and have a timeless sense of physical capability.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. It makes me want to go play right now.
So again, just like that get up though, and lifting really heavy, and that heavy deadlift, it's the same thing. The way we teach is through developmental progression. So we love to incorporate play, and again, it's just like the full bodied experience of strength is a super heavy deadlift. The full body's experience of MovNat is going out in nature and playing, but it has to be earned, I think.
Yeah.
To be safe, to be efficient, to be maximally, again, a full-bodied experience that's not just horsing around and ending up either injured or not really understanding how to improve anything. That's what MovNat is. It's a method. It's not just this idea of moving naturally and going outside. So we have our students earn it, and it makes for a much richer, more full-bodied experience when they do play.
Awesome. So when you talk about that, so I'm kind of curious. So, do you do like most of your training like outdoors, or do you do a kind of a mix between indoors and outdoors?
I do a mix. We actually do have winter here in New Mexico, although I sort of tongue in cheek compared to the northeast and even the far northwest, or in the Rockies anyway. But I think what's really important is we view MovNat as training. So yes, I'm always training in a way, and with that, by training, I mean I'm systematically focused on something and improving one or a few assets or one or a few abilities. And to do that, I need to be able to, do it in a very convenient, practical way. So a lot of my training will be inside, and right now, that would be split between my home, which the nice thing about MovNat is you can do a lot in your home, and then we have a few licensed facilities throughout the whole world. Well, two of them happen to be in Albuquerque, which is right down the street. So I'll go to them, and they have the traditional stuff, but they also have the MovNat equipment, which is like, if you haven't seen it, check it out because you'll understand MovNat just by looking at it. You're gonna be like, whoa, that's a playground. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. But again, it's very it lends itself well to training because it's incremental progression is very, very easy because you can start with very, very low type things and work your way up in very small measurable increments. Just in the same way, if you're going to deadlift heavy, you should work your way up slowly using principles of progressive overload. It's the same with jumping, balancing, climbing, all that kind of stuff. So it makes it really easy to train and to improve in a very organized way. Now, I'll do the same thing outside too. I'll train in a very organized way outside, but I'll use more complex surfaces like rocks and logs, and again, just getting gritty. I'll do a Turkish get up, which, by the way, the Turkish didn't invent how to get up, as our founder Erwan would say, with a log on my shoulder, or a sandbag or my son or whatever. And then I'll do a bunch of different get ups with that same load, and I'll do it outside on a rocky surface just because, I don't know. I like to feel like I'm tough in a way. I feel like I want to be able to move on. I don't want to be uncomfortable on the ground. I want to be able to engage and move. If I had to grapple or fight, I'm not always going to be on a mat, right? So anyway, so I'll spend a lot of time outside training systematically too. And then, of course, hand in hand with MovNat is going out there and just letting it rip and playing. So I'll go out into the woods, and I'll just sometimes I'll do, again, structured things. Like it's the same, wrestling workouts I used to do that were agility based. I'll do in outside environments with complex, rock to rock jumps, sprints. I'll get down and crawl. I'll sprint off my, I'll start on on my belly in a prone lying position and get up and sprint. And then again, there'll be some times where I'm just like, there's a point over there. I'm going to go explore and just see what's up there. And along the way, I'll find, my friend Stefano Tripney would call it obstacle optics. Okay. So it's just like what somebody would see is to get from A to B, like they'll ask, okay, where's the trail? From my perspective, I won't even look for a trail. And then along the way, I'm going to get sidetracked with all the incredible obstacles and opportunities to move and grow that nature offers. So, again, I may climb a tree. I may just jump from a rock that looks interesting into, I may, go into a roll landing. I may vault over a log. I may crawl under something. And it's just so much fun. It's incredible. And it really makes everything you do make sense. And be fun and be something you can actually test to see if you actually are capable instead of sort of hoping you are, even though you don't actually do these things. And it makes moving through like real, like modern environments, which don't really require anything, so easy. I had a 60-year-old client who came in who couldn't move very well. And by, 2 years into his training, he was climbing walls that, his 20-year-old, assistants or whatever, when he would go to job sites, couldn't even get up on, or if they could, it looked horrible. He's crawling under desks in meetings and stuff like that, because it just feels so good to engage with your world. And again, modern, simple environments, even walls, become like utterly easy compared to natural environments that have a lot of complexity to them.
Wow. Yeah, it's, I can totally see a lot of the meditative qualities, especially when you get out in nature and listening to you describe just kind of scanning the horizon and seeing what's out there. And it's like, just where you're going to go next and how you're going to move. It's really cool. So it always keeps it, in a way, the environment around you is providing the variety, so to speak.
Yeah, and I would say, well, it's absolutely a spiritual experience in every sense of the word, a meditative, spiritual, engaging experience that allows your brain to relax, allows you to engage and just, move, and just take in the air, feel the wind on your face. It's, it's amazing. And I'll say that if you're in an urban environment, you could do the exact same thing. There's parks. There's obstacles in urban environments. Parkour does a great job showing some of that. It's not like you have to jump from building to building to engage with your environment, and, we all go on vacation. We all travel. So that's the time when you can start to train in nature a little more, and you can simulate some of those circumstances right in your home, right in your gym, however it is, so that when you do enter nature in these pristine environments or whatever, you feel prepared and you feel excited and you learn what your limitations are, like, when I train indoors or outdoors, I learn exactly how far I can jump and exactly how well I can land on a given surface. So when I go outside, I can judge better what to do instead of just going for it. And just, again, Erwan Le Corre, our founder, would call it, just natural movement jackass. We're not out there just like trying to be a monkey, just swinging around, just being reckless. It's engaging, but it's also smart. So, yeah,
totally. So let me ask you this. So how have you, what's your thought process been when you've had to kind of step back and try to structure and put together some of the curriculum from a, writing it and teaching it point of view so that people can learn it,
Yeah.
That's going to be challenging.
That was actually that's how I got hired by MovNat, because again, I went on a retreat with the founder, Erwan, who's a good friend of mine and just an awesome human being, and was just totally blown away and had this sort of epiphany that most people who do MovNat have when they go through this experience. But from there, I had to go home. I was in Connecticut and train my, 40 to 60-year-old clients and myself and how to do this. And it was sort of daunting. Because again, there's so many movements. That's the problem. It's like, how do I organize this in a way that's systematic, that has, that there's progressions, that there's benchmarks. So I went to a MovNat level 1 certification, and there was some clarity there, for sure. It was organized fairly well. But I still saw, as somebody with a traditional strength and conditioning background, I still wasn't satisfied with it. And I told the founder this. I was like, the movements are fantastic. It's sort of organized from simple to hard, which is good. but how can I organize this in a way that, from a professional's perspective, that starts with fundamental and progresses to be more complex, and just makes a lot of sense, and organize it into individual training sessions using principles of programming, macrocycles, mesocycles, microcycles. How can I organize this in a way that leads to improvement without being utterly disorganized and random? So those were the questions I had, and I didn't really have an answer to them to start. And so, I just did what I did right after college. And, I started right after college. I didn't have a background in exercise science. I started opening up textbooks and reading them, and eventually ended up with the CSCS, fundamentals of whatever, strength and conditioning textbook. So I started opening up textbooks on neuroscience. I was like, okay, what are we doing here? Fundamentally, the limiting factor and the driving force of MovNat is the brain. So exercise science is basically everything but the brain, right? So when you open up your exercise textbook, you'll see stuff on the musculoskeletal system. You'll see stuff on the cardiorespiratory system. You'll see stuff about how to increase VO2 max, strength, conditioning, power. And there'll be vague references to the motor cortex. And that's it. So that doesn't really tell me much about how the processes of the brain work, how learning really happens, how motor skill and skill acquisition, how that happens optimally and most efficiently. So I started reading about basically motor control and learning. A lot of different work, a lot of different research papers, about neuroplasticity, about dynamic patterns theory, about all these, things that are responsible, the facilitators of movement competence. And from there, I took those principles that I learned and applied them to programming and organizing training. And that's how I've helped refine the MovNat method. And that's why, we can still embrace principles of progressive overload and strength and power and all the beautiful stuff we see in exercise science. But we can also embrace motor learning theory and all these other things that lend itself to teaching people how to move really well so that they both have competence and capacity together. So that's the curriculum development side, has been my job for the last 3 years, and we've made massive strides forward. We have a lot of success. It's being adapted better into, more traditional fitness settings. And we just launched an online coaching program where we're, again, continuing to battle test our programming with a lot of success. And, just like anything else, someone will come along with some even better ideas of how to do this. But for now, I think we're in a really, really good place.
That's fantastic, man. That's really cool. What, are there any authors or books that jumped to mind when you were reading about the motor control or neuroplasticity that were particularly helpful?
Yeah. Well, I think that the textbook Motor Control and Learning, I forget who the author is just a great resource. It's a great introduction to sort of everything in a way. That's sort of the first thing I read. And, as I was doing it, I was, marking off passages, circling stuff, led me down the rabbit hole of research papers. So I think that was a really good start. I think that the MovNat manual that comes with the certification is another great resource because a lot of it comes from that, and it's very simplified and approachable. So not everybody can pick up a textbook and read it. And and then not everybody could take that textbook and understand how to implement it in programming. So we've done all that work for you. And we don't dumb it down to the point where we're not teaching you as a teacher to understand the science behind movement, but we're also not expecting you to, we make it approachable, we make it simple, diagram based, very approachable and learnable, and easier, really, honestly, to implement. So, I've done a lot of that hard work for you. So I'd highly recommend the MovNat manual, the progression manual that comes with the training, because all the movements are organized into progressions. Again, that developmental progression is incorporated. Again, not to pitch what we're doing, but there's just nothing like it. And, I'd rather, if you're interested in it from purely the sake of teaching movement, I think it's the way to go. If you're just interested in the topic, yeah, I think that textbook is probably a good place to start. I think the author is, the last name is McGill.
It's not Stuart McGill, is it?
No.
Okay, different McGill.
one. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Nope.
Well, no, I'll be. I'm going to check both out. I'm going to look at the book and then look at some of the upcoming dates for the coursework.
Yeah, I think that the two kind of key takeaways outside of the idea of progressing people developmentally, if you want me just to quickly summarize, are
Sure.
well, there's a lot. First, there's again the fundamental task of our body, of ourselves, is to be able to move through complex environments, as I've mentioned, and we do this through, it's scientists attempt to model this through dynamic systems theory, and dynamic patterns theory is the movement side of that. And it's a largely unconscious process, but it's very dependent on environmental input. It's essentially telling us that our environment shapes our movements, and there's also these innate mechanisms that already sort of are hardwired in ourselves and are sort of flexible and improve over time. From there, as kids, we go through this process of there was coincidentally a French developmental scientist, developmental psychologist, who came up with this theory of perceptual motor development that basically showed that kids, the very first IQ test kids ever take is their ability to move. Okay, so our ability to move is a problem-solving process. Okay, they're not doing math at that time. They're not figuring out grammar. They're literally figuring out how to move, and their intelligence, their cognitive abilities is highly linked to that skill. Okay, and this is a process. There's not a lot of research on adults, but there's a good amount of research emerging that shows that process actually still continues into adulthood, and our brain has a lot of neuroplasticity to be able to continue, and it needs that stimulation of interacting with complex environments to be able to move well and to function well. And even there's a MovNat research study that shows that just by doing these movements that working memory increased by, I don't know, I think it was like 20% or something like that, which is substantial for older adults. And then, from there, there's the science that we're more familiar with, which is progression, because even in nature, we see that there's examples of organisms with higher nervous systems teaching other organisms, their offspring, how to do things and expediting the learning curve faster than the trial and error of perceptual motor development. So that's what we're used to. The problem is we're used to just doing progression, and we don't really allow our clients to interact with their environments. We sort of skip that trial and error process, and we just try to over-engineer movement. When we can have these three things coming together with a lot of stimulation, where we have a role as a teacher, where the environment has a role as a teacher, and where we, again, stimulate our clients as much as possible, even from an early age, because kids these days can't even move well anymore. We see them as the apex of movement, but really adults should be able to move way better than children. That's where we look into the optimizing, using principles of neuroscience and motor learning theory to optimize movement, and that's what we do at MovNat.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to learning more and checking out the book and some of the courses. So I'll be sure to include the links in the show notes.
Yeah, and again, for those that are daunted by this idea of neuroscience and stuff, like it's actually very intuitive. It's just understanding what we already sort of should know, and is intuitive already for our students. Again, it just helps strengthen what we already know. In a way, it's not necessarily anything that you need to know. As long as you know how to apply it in real life, that's super important. And just, again, allow people to move. That's really what it's about. Yeah. So there was something else I had in my mind that I sort of lost, but yeah, I lost it.
That's all right. That's great. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, MovNat related, or I think we made our way through all the topics and stuff pretty organically as we were hoping for. Before we move into the rapid fire.
No, I just think that that's really it. I think that having a systematic way to, this is the takeaway right here. I got it. It's back. Okay, to give meaning to movement. So as fitness professionals, we get very hung up on the pursuit of strength, the pursuit of mobility, the pursuit of power, because it's interesting to us, because we're scientists at the end of the day, because we like organizing and seeing how we can systematically improve our physiology. Now, what MovNat is that same thing, but it also gives meaning to movement. And that's super important because when we give meaning to movements, it's a lot stickier than when we just sort of pursue just developing assets. In other words, it's going to be way more important for one of your students to really understand how to carry something well, how to lift and carry something well, and then maybe even be able to get over an obstacle while they're carrying something, and that something might be their child, which is really important, than it is going to teach them how to systematically improve their force velocity curve through the jump or whatever, So I think that giving meaning to movement and teaching them the importance of having a broad spectrum of movement and letting them connect the dots to their real life, and as opposed to just telling them, hey, when you deadlift, it's really functional. It's going to help everything else in your life. And the get up, it's really functional. It's going to help everything else in your life. And we actually help them draw conclusions and make it more intuitive to like, oh yeah, I do this in my life already. This really makes sense. It's just going to really help a lot of your clients make movement a part of their life as opposed to a compartmentalized little thing they do to check off a box.
Right. And
so that's my.
Yeah. I was just listening and processing and seeing how all the different kind of the 8 domains that you had mentioned and some of those skills that you focus on and teach in the curriculum, how those are going to be very well represented in individual daily life throughout the day.
Yep. And, we're working with, some of the bigger physical therapists out there, the more, some of the well-known ones, to find what the minimum effective dose for MovNat is so that we can, systematically improve shoulder mobility, hip mobility, and all the stuff that we know clients need. But I think the meaning part of it is really important as well. So that's what it's all about.
Awesome, man. That's fantastic. All right. Time for the rapid fire.
All right. Let's do it.
Sweet. So, Danny, given all of your experience and knowledge at this point in your life, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Oh, man. Don't stop doing what you're doing. Don't stop, view the time you spent in nature, jumping, engaging, and climbing don't forget that that's actually a workout. That's actually a way to maintain your body and to improve it. It's not just a hobby. It's not something dangerous. It's something that you actually fundamentally really need to incorporate and view as a lifestyle and as a part of your actual traditional workouts.
Love it. If you had to pick one, what's your favorite strength training exercise?
Probably. Oh man, that's a tough one. Of course, the old. Oh, geez. That's a good question. I love, the fundamentals. Deadlift, absolutely. I think that's a great, strength exercise. All my favorite movements are all power oriented because I'm naturally wired for power. So I was going to say, a power clean, even with a rock or whatever, and a muscle up, which we call a power up. Those are my two favorite, but your audience would be like, hey, those are power. So if I'm going to go for like a grinding strength movement, I would say a deadlift.
Cool. Do you have a particular go-to or something that you come back to often in terms of your favorite training session, like something that helps you to get in the right frame of mind?
Ground movement, always. I do it every single day. I don't necessarily time it or anything like that, but it just checks me in terms of where I'm actually at in my body. It helps me tune in to my breathing, helps me tune in to what my body's telling me in terms of my mobility, in terms of my strength. It's kind of like a self-regulator, and it just feels fantastic. So definitely ground movement.
Awesome. How has your training changed today compared to 10 years ago?
Yeah, well, 10 years ago, let's see, at 22, I was doing very structured strength and power and conditioning things. I was doing power cleans with everything was barbells and then running or sprinting. And none of them really felt great, but I love lifting heavy stuff. So now much more dynamic. It's just, again, I let go. I'm not above lifting a barbell, but I don't force myself to lift barbells. I lift and do whatever I enjoy, and just a lot more dynamic movement, I guess I could say. It's natural, but it's dynamic. Again, balancing, all the stuff we're talking about. So I'd say, it's 10 to the 100th power more dynamic than it used to be.
Nice. You kind of touched on this before, but to kind of summarize, how have the injuries that you've sustained, how have they affected the way you train in your life?
In a lot of ways, they shaped it, because I think to any athlete, being injured is like the equivalent of death. You don't want to stop doing what you love to do ever. And so I discovered fundamentally that I don't like to do one thing. I like to move. So my injuries have always been my teachers, because if I'm injured and I'm doing something that whoever guru says is pretty perfect, then I know it's not the movement that's wrong. It's not me that's wrong. It's something was wrong. Something else was wrong. So I had to chase down the rabbit hole and find, why am I still injured, even though my Turkish get-up and my deadlifts are from under the physical therapist's eyes and the top level strength professional's eyes are near perfect. So that to me says I'm doing something wrong. So injuries have always been my best teacher, and they're pretty much what's brought me down this rabbit hole. And luckily, because I would have never known how much fun and how much I would enjoy this, even beyond just, I'm not living in fear of pain at all. I'm living because I'm moving in a way that I truly deep down enjoy.
That's great. Yeah, you can tell, man. That's the one thing that continues to come across every time I listen to you, is just the enthusiasm and the passion.
Yeah, if you've ever come from a place where you can't move because of your back or your shoulder or whatever, if you take the opposite of that, the total opposite of that feeling, that's MovNat, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. It just spills out of me because I'm so full of these experiences that just really charge me up. And it's why I discovered why I love athletics. Athletics felt like this apex moment when I could just move so well and be so powerful and so dominant and so successful, even when I lost, whatever. Well, this is the exact same feeling, except it's not tied to competition. It's just movement, and that's what I love.
That's cool. Yeah, because the great thing about that too is you get that feeling, but you don't have to. There's not necessarily a outcome or result tied to it, right? So it's like, you get that experience, but you don't have to worry about potentially being on the quote unquote the losing side and dealing with the after effects of losing a competition or an event.
Everybody's a winner in movement, for sure. Everybody was born to be able to move for the most part. And whatever degree you can move is freedom in a lot of ways. It's super tied to your freedom. So, and it doesn't have to be a competitive outlet. I think that in America, in a culture that's centered around competition, that's the only way we're motivating people to move is through competition. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really sad. I think a lot is lost in movement because of that. And that's why I love what I'm doing, because it's not about competition. It's about expressing the innate freedom that we all have to some degree. And most of us have to a much larger degree than we understand. And if I could inject that feeling into you for 5 seconds, you'd be hooked, and you'd be doing it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I have no doubt, man. I'm definitely picking up the enthusiasm. It's been charging me up just listening to you. So trying to be a sponge over here on my end.
Yeah, and you don't give up what you're doing. You don't have to give up what you're doing. It's just about expanding out.
For sure. Oh yeah, absolutely. What's your best tip to improve recovery after a training session?
To actually learn how to listen to your body, for sure. So if I lift and carry something really, really heavy, the next day it's hard for me to get up out of bed, not because I'm sore, because I'm just neurologically taxed. Right. So listening to your body from there's this all pain, no gain, pain. What is it? I don't even remember the expression. No pain, no gain, right? So we just push through everything. That makes sense if you're preparing for an athletic event and you're supposed to peak. And even if your body, most athletes walk into a competition with injuries, and that's normal. When you're talking about sustainability and longevity, your body is really, really intelligent. It's going to give you signals, so don't ignore them. If you feel pain in a joint, don't push through it. We already know this as strength and conditioning professionals. But if you feel tired and lethargic, don't push through it. Listen to your body. do things that are restorative. With natural movement, there's this huge spectrum of movements you can choose from. So just listen to your body. That's a huge, huge, huge thing for recovery. Eat in a way that's nourishing, in a way that's satisfying and filling, and rich in nutrients. Just like, we want a nutrient-rich movement diet. We want a nutrient-rich food diet, of course, as well. So all these things come together, you're going to feel on top of the world.
Awesome. Now, next question. What's your favorite meal?
That's a good question. I love eating. So anything with protein in it, anything with meat, especially like wild game. Again, I was so resistant to paleo eating in the beginning because I knew, again, that like for body composition purposes, it's a science. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to, eat only organic, local, blah, 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 and have all these rules like I talked about. But as I've understood the importance of the ecological impact on eating, as I've understood the importance of the actual physiological outcome of eating poor foods, I've valued much more just wild, natural food as much as possible, balanced meals. I wish I had a direct answer. I've always been a caveman at heart. I've been told that since I was young. So I don't have any fancy meals. I'd say a good old, steaks and sweet potatoes, maybe a good, glass of vino with some dark chocolate afterwards. It's a good night for me.
That sounds delicious, man.
Yeah.
What's one book everyone should read?
Oh man, it depends on who you're talking about. So everyone.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, strength and conditioning, health and fitness. It could be any genre, any topic.
Well, I'll say one of my focuses I love is working specifically with men and reclaiming masculinity and what that really means deep down inside. I really like two books there, but I'll mention one just because it captures, I think, the more brutal aspects very well, which a lot of people resonate with, which is Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. If you've ever heard of that. Okay. It gets into the Spartan mentality, but not this, like, again, if you put it in context, these people lived a very they lived a life that was very in tune with their environments, in tune with the pressures of their modern, of their environments, and their culture was centered around working together. And I think that the combination of cooperation and training is super, super inspiring. Now, for anybody, I love Eastern spirituality. There's a book called The Book of Understanding by Osho that I really, really like. That sort of opened my eyes to some of the conditioning that's in our culture. And it's not a religious book. It's just about sort of understanding yourself and understanding nature. And I think it's just a great book, a really eye-opening book, a really approachable, but also, very direct and sort of in your face book. I really enjoy that one.
Awesome. I'll be sure to include both those in the show notes too, and I'll check them out myself. Thanks. Final question. Who have you studied or do you continue to study in your career to improve and get better?
Who do I continue to study? I would say, and at the expense of sounding extremely narcissistic, I would say myself, because there's just this vast thing, there's this vast thing that is your mind. And to try to understand it, to try to really listen to yourself, to try to understand your thought patterns, to understand your role in nature and the rhythms of nature, and putting yourself in that context and putting yourself in there and understanding that, I think, is super important. There's a lot of people who talk about that, but at the end of the day, if you don't actually experience it, if you don't actually spend time in nature, if you don't actually study your own thoughts and try to ease them, if you don't do the work, it ends up just kind of being all, again, another Erwanism here, mental masturbation. It turns into just us staying in our rational brains, thinking everything through. So I'd say study yourself. I study myself, and it's the most empowering, incredible thing, letting yourself be your own teacher and trusting your intuition. I think it's the most incredible journey there is out there.
Excellent, man. Well, that takes us through the end of the interview and the show.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for having me on here. This has been a pleasure, and I look forward to getting to know you personally more, and let me know how I can help you in any way.
Yeah, likewise, man. Yeah, just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye off air.
All right. Thanks again.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the Leo Training Podcast. If you value this content, please take a moment of your time, head on over to iTunes and drop in a 5-star review. Or even better, share it on your favorite social media network, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram. And next week, I'll have another brand new episode where I sit down with strength coach and endurance athlete, Tony Cowden. Tony completed the 666 challenge, which is an individual who squats and deadlifts 600 pounds and runs a sub 6-minute mile. So Tony is going to sit down and discuss his training and preparation for that and what that experience was like. So don't miss that episode. Another brand new one coming at you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.